Okay. Hey, everyone who is here. Hopefully, some other folks filter in over the next few minutes. Um, so, I'm very excited to start this panel with Sharon and Tiz on basically the establishment and the ongoing work of the QTIPOC Survival Fund. The two of them, in conjunction with some other folks, started in the Triangle area, the Piedmont region more broadly, um, towards the inception of the pandemic. So I'll just get into it. I want to introduce the two of them really quickly and then move into our conversation. So we'll start with Sharon. Sharon Holland is an African-descended queer and gender nonconforming elder and writer who is also a professor at UNC, Chapel Hill, and author of the books The Erotic Life of Racism and Raising the Dead, Readings of Death and Black Subjectivity. She organized with ACT UP in the 80s during the AIDS crisis and has supported anti-racist and anti-HB2 work at Chapel Hill. Her approach to community building is intersectional and encompasses deep connection to the place that is Chapel Hill and the broader Piedmont region in the South, and its people. As her grandfather was active in the Durham Civil Rights Movement in the early 1950s, and her mother, a UNC alum from the class of '61, was a plaintiff in the Blue School desegregation case. She came back to the Triangle to teach and to continue her family's social justice legacy. So that's Sharon. In a very, very small nutshell. I'm so excited that she's with us today. And then Tiz Giordano is an independent community organizer and essential grocery worker. They never attended college and do not have formal ties to academia. They've lived experience surviving trafficking and food and housing insecurity as an adrift queer youth, and that past informs their mutual aid work today. Since 2016, they have facilitated almost $100,000 in survival funds getting into the hands of community members that need it most. They also played an important role in the historic 2019 #TransferConnecticut campaign, a grassroots coalition of activists and organizations who work together to get transgender North Carolinian Connecticut Zara Brown, wrongly incarcerated in a men's prison, transferred to gender-appropriate housing. Sharon and Tiz, and this is like my favorite part of your bio, Tiz. Sharon and Tiz met at Tiz's co-op in 2018 when Tiz recognized a kindred queer spirit and invited Sharon to the local queer family dinner. When the pandemic hit, they sprang into action and the QTI POC Survival Fund was born. So that's who we have with us today. And I'm Hill Malatino, president-elect of SEWSA, and I'm super stoked to be sort of facilitating this conversation. So I have a few questions that I sent to Tiz and Sharon beforehand, and I figure we'll just start there and see where the conversation goes. And the first one is just tell us a little bit about the project for folks here that might not be familiar with it, how it got started, and what your plans are for growing it.
Thank you. Thank you, Hill. Thank you, everyone who's in the session with us right now. Thank you, Tiz, for your friendship and your love and your care for our community. Basically, how did this start? Right when the stay-at-home, folks were like, look, stay-at-home orders are coming, so stock up, and while everyone was buying toilet paper, and I was, trying to figure out, like, should I buy some toilet paper? I mean, is it worth it? I went to the co-op. I thought, well, I just want some natural food. And I saw Tiz, and I was just like, people are losing their jobs. We've got to do something. Can I plug into whatever it is you're doing? And they're like, oh my gosh, I just sent you something, right? I was literally thinking about Tiz, and they walked around the corner. And I had just gotten a teaching award, and it came with a pretty big check. And I decided to roll that check to seed fund. I wanted to do something with my money that was going to make a difference. And, when the COVID stay-at-home came, it just seemed the right thing to do. And so Tiz was like, yeah, I've been talking with Bakari about mutual aid for such a long time. Let me get in touch with Bakari, who's the co-founder of QTIPOC Survival Fund. And I'm like, great, just let me know. I said, I got this little check coming. We can start it and just see where that goes. So I don't know, Tiz, you might want to throw in something there.
Yeah. I had been running individual mutual aid campaigns for mostly Black trans women and femmes in our community through our local queer exchange for a while before that. And the idea was just that, our community members who are facing systemic racism as well as transphobia are at a huge disadvantage. And we as a community have an obligation to intervene in these systemic, this oppression, systemic disparities. So over time, you know, I realized that you know, I had the hookups to the people who needed funds just for doing this work. And yeah, when Sharon came around the corner, I was freaking out. I thought I was going to die. I mean, everyone who was an essential worker at that time, you know, thankfully I work at a cooperative grocery store that started making everyone wear a mask very quickly on the pandemic. But it was a really scary time. I was terrified. All my coworkers were terrified. And in times of crisis, when you don't know how to put one foot in front of the other, for me, I try to help, try to fix things. And I knew that Sharon had the ability to furnish these survival funds to people. And I had the links to those folks in our community. And that's how our first like distribution started. It was just Sharon gave us an amount. I broke that amount into, you know, 15 people that I knew. I think every single one of those folks were Black trans folks. And we PayPal, Venmo'd, Cash App that money to those people. And then since then, we've redistributed over $70,000 to queer and trans people of color in our community. Yeah, it's an incredible gift to be able to offer to our community, but I feel like this should be happening everywhere.
Absolutely. And that's actually one of the questions that I have sort of towards the end of this, but maybe we'll get to it beforehand, about how to replicate this sort of project, because it's so, one of the things I love about it is that in part, at least the germ of the idea was about actually figuring out a way to wrest funds from academia and like the enclosure of academia and put it back out, right? Redistribute it. And I just think that's brilliant. And I wish every like tenured and tenure track person in the country was doing this with whatever, you know, extra funds they get, instead of like remodeling their bathrooms, right? So that's shady, but I did. Part of why I was like, this is such an important project, and so important for us to talk about as a model, right? As at least some of us, right, with one leg in academia. So one of the questions I had that's not on this list, but I was just thinking about it as you all were talking, has to do with how you dispersed these funds and like what informed how the decisions you made around how to disperse them. So that's kind of a big question. And from what I understand, you do it in sort of like even lump sums, like you just mentioned his. So I'm just wondering what the sort of underlying politics of that decision are.
Well, I'll back up just a little bit, just to say that, you know, surviving the first, what I call that first pandemic, the HIV/AIDS crisis, and, you know, many of us being, you know, kind of feeling like throwaway kids, you know, many of us not able to go home, caring for sick people. You know, I was involved in that group of, you know, lesbians who took care of people in some way, shape, or form, especially, you know, our male identified, you know, and femme identified, you know, brothers who were, you know, this was something, the only thing that gave me hope at the beginning of this pandemic, and it's not very much to say, is that, you know, when AIDS came along, it was going to kill you. And this one, not so much, but since it was global, yes, it was going to be much quicker, right? So it was the same in terms of scale, but not the same in terms of like the death sentence. And so I kind of wanted to mark that because I also feel like I felt responsible. I said, I have to do something because I've lived through that moment, and I lived through that moment with queer people in isolation, you know, with a government and a world that was telling us that, you know, it was God's retribution, that was telling us that, you know, us surviving this was not possible. And so I feel like the biggest thing that that in answering your question to think about how the fund works is the intergenerational work that I do with Tiz. A lot of times Tiz would be like, well, I'm going to do this and ask the group. I'm like, why are you asking the group? And Tiz is like, we need to ask the group, Sharon. It's really important. I'm like, okay. And so what I'm trying to say is that, the low barrier fund, the building of community that we do together, those two things were not necessarily the way in which I would have done this mutual aid, right? Because I come from another model. And so Tiz had to learn from me. I had to learn from them that the way to do this, the way to build community is to actually provide not only redistribution of wealth, but also self-determination. When you allow someone, and not only when I feel like there are no real words in the English language for trying to do this work, right? But when you let someone, when you allow them, when you partner with them for their own self-determination, then they give you something back that's absolutely invaluable, and that's trust. Mm-hmm. And so that, to me, is if I were to think about how this work gets done, we don't have a sign-up sheet. People talk to Tiz in the beginning. We know each other in community. If somebody's feeling like they're okay, they'll skip a distribution. And I can talk about the nuts and bolts a little bit later, but I kind of wanted to talk about the feeling first, like what this has produced in me and the changes it's made. I don't feel like I'm surviving. I don't feel at all I've survived this pandemic alone, but I felt that way in the first one. I don't think there's one queer person, we alone in terms of isolated from our surrounding communities, right? And so that's been really amazing to me. And I don't know if Tiz wants to add to that, but I learned a lot feeling wise from this work.
Yeah, I definitely want to uplift that Sharon, this work would not be possible without Sharon, if only just for the logistics of being able to be an account holder. I, having done mutual aid, campaigns in the past, I was getting to the point where I was being denied services like food stamps because I had so many mutual aid funds coming in and out of my account, and they were counting that as income. So in that way, but also, I think that for queer people who, for whatever reason, don't have elders in their lives that can support them, having Sharon be that person that says, yeah, I've got your back and you're not alone, and we're going to make sure that you don't get kicked out of your apartment, or we're going to make sure that you can rest while you as you and deal with this high risk pregnancy, or we're going to make sure that you eat today, and that's a huge gift. This is, we call ourselves amongst our recipients the House of Holland, and look at Sharon as our house mother, because it's more than just cut and dry, here's a check. It's our recipients know that they can reach out and have someone hold space for them. And for some of our recipients, it's not even that, like, their community can't hold them or doesn't want, or it's not that their families like don't want to help them. For a lot of our people, their parents and grandparents just don't have the financial ability because they're taking care of surviving themselves. So yeah, I think that the gift that we've all been able to offer each other is one of community, and it goes way beyond just, and I guess that's what mutual aid is. It's community building work. It's us keeping us safe. It's us taking care of each other when the government doesn't care. So yeah.
I also wanted to add one thing, for, kind of the academic audience out there. Doing this work has made me think a lot about Samuel Delaney's work, especially in Times Square Red, Times Square Blue, and thinking about his theory about contact. That, we don't have enough opportunities in this world for contact. Now, of course, it's a pandemic and we haven't had skin to skin contact. And the one thing we keep talking about with the vaccine rolling out is maybe we'll be able to actually hug one another soon. But contact, that in the way Delaney's talking about it, is about intergenerational, but also interclass relationships. Mm-hmm. And I really feel that it's one of the most, if you've never read the book, please read it. It's amazing. And it's it's one of the few queer studies books that actually talks about sex, and uses that kind of way of that erotic contact as a way, an intergenerational and interclass contact as a way to think about being together as human beings. That's really important for a democratic society. And so I feel, for me, I understand Samuel Delaney's work. I mean, I loved it before, right? But I understand his work so much more now. So I just wanted to throw that out there because it's been important. And yes, there are lots of nuts and bolts. And in the beginning, it was kind of like, it was a hot mess. I'm like, I can't get the Cash App to work. I got locked out of Cash App so many times. I thought the FBI was going to come to my door. They're like, you don't know such and such and such, and I'm like, this idea, think about it, the way the apps work, you don't know this person. Why are you giving them money? They're always suspicious about the way in which I decide to use to spend my life. Right. In these algorithms. It was amazing. I would always have to send a thing to Tiz, like, Tiz, did you get it out? Did you get it out? And I'm like, Cash App hates me. And I would literally have a meltdown. And Tiz would be like, it's okay. It's okay. So.
I also want to just really quickly say that, one of the things that, and I think Sharon will probably speak to this, but back to your original question, how we are recipient led, the way in which our funds are allocated, all of that is a consensus conversation that happens between organizers and recipients. And so, for example, in the beginning of the pandemic, our recipients voted to give double shares of funds to people who were like pregnant recipients and recipients with small children, because they believe that, fighting birth giver mortality in our communities and infant mortality in our communities is an important thing. And that is something that Sharon and I could never have said, hey guys, we've decided that, we're just going to, if everyone gets $200 this distribution period, we're just going to decide to give $400 to this particular person. But the fact that our community of recipients decided, hey, we really want to make sure that this person gets through this pregnancy okay and is able to come out of it okay. That was a really beautiful thing. When people have been able to say, actually, I don't need these funds anymore. My life is in a different situation. We've had 2 people transition away from accepting funds, which was a huge gift to the rest of our recipients. That could be the difference between them receiving $200 or $50 more. I mean, anything. And when people are in survival mode, every cent counts. But basically at this point, we have a certain percentage, or we have a certain amount that we fundraise, and then we have 17 recipients, and we divide the amount that we have by 17. And then Sharon takes care of Cash Apping, Venmoing, and PayPaling. It was really important to me as a white person, and seeing how these other mutual aid funds have kind of imploded. I did not want to have any access to the money. This QTIPOC fund, white people should not have any access to the money. I truly believe that. And also just from seeing, I was involved with the occupation of DC back in 2011, 2012. And, when people are in survival mode, money goes missing. And that was another reason why it was really important that we had someone who did not need these funds to survive to have access to the actual PayPal and accounts, which is where Sharon came in. So, and no judgment on that, people do what they need to do to eat and pay rent, not like, so anyways, our fund is recipient led. They make decisions, consensus decisions about how the money is is distributed, and we try to make it as like equal as possible. So.
Yeah, there's yeah, I mean, I was looking at the chat. There's a question in the chat about how to make this public facing institutions. I don't know if you have another question, Hill, or you want me to
You can go ahead and answer that. I always have more questions, but we don't take them anywhere.
I mean, one of the things I really want to, we did this together and we learned a lot while doing this, so I'll throw some things out there that are really important. I think I think you're absolutely right, Hill. One of the things that I want to do is grow this work among academics across the country. I think that, I'm a full tenured distinguished professor, so I have access to funds, and I feel that I have access to the institution, and the institution is nestled in our community and pulls resources from that community all the time, always. And so this is a way to give back directly in a self-determining way. And I think you're absolutely right. I would love to replicate this structure. Tiz is absolutely right about how the money goes. So first, we have, I just want to say, I probably can't name folks, but I just want to say thank you to the community of folks in the Triangle, Chapel Hill, Carborough, who, we put something out on Queer Exchange, like, can somebody help us with such and such? And somebody sent me an email and said, I can, let's talk. So I had a couple banker friends. One banker friend of mine is Lumbee, one of the tribal peoples in North Carolina, and it was totally great. And I said, I need to do this fund, and I need to do this in like 2 days. And, he was like, okay. All right. And I said, I need to get this money out. Right. And really help me. And then the bankers helped me to figure out how to, the big thing for us is that we didn't have time to file for not-for-profit status. That's like a 3 to 6 month process, depending upon paperwork. But we could file as an unincorporated association. And if you'll see some of the links that Tiz will share with you, that's one of the, like, in the sheets, that's like the kind of middle way that sometimes people try to get housed within a place that already has a 501(c)(3). But then when you do that, you have to make reports on the allocations you give to your recipients, and that can get kind of cumbersome. And then there's tax. So there's always some tax liability involved. We decided to go with an unincorporated association, and, which at around 50,000, you're okay. But of course Tiz and I thought, well, we'll get to 50,000 in a year. And Tiz called me and said in November, like in October, like, Sharon, did you see what do you want to do? And I'm like, I don't know. Let's just keep doing it and hope that someone's gracious on the back end, right? And so we did the unincorporated association. We got a checking account that I do not write checks from, right? But that allowed me to then get the access to the online account, right? Because if I had a savings account, right, people couldn't write checks, right? So I got a savings account and a cash card. One of the things you'll find right away is that some people don't only have Cash App. Some folks don't have PayPal. Some people only have Venmo. Venmo and PayPal kick people off all the time. And so does Cash App for all kinds of reasons, right? Our recipients are folks who aren't getting a stimulus check. We've had one recipient who has no bank account and has changed addresses twice and is an elder in our community, right? And is one of the most important people in terms of social justice work, in our town. And so this person will not be getting a $1,400 check, or into a bank account because they don't own one, right? And so the fund has been crucial in making up that. And what I would like to have happen is, if the government is giving out checks the next time, I want there to be some kind of legislation that if they can't figure out bank accounts for people, but they know those folks exist, they send that money to the mutual aid funds. And then that money gets distributed by city government to people in need. That there's, that we can't stop at. Some folks, we can't stop at we gave $1,400, even though, as my grandma said, damn well that money did not get there. So, when I think of our recipients, when I think of our general community, I know at least half of our community doesn't have access to stable housing, doesn't have access to a bank account. It lives in a cash economy. So yeah. Anyway, I wanted to kind of put that out there, that those are the kind of building blocks. And I think Tiz is right. Having somebody in charge of the money who has connections, who has a little cultural capital, and also, it's a good way to use cultural capital and financial security in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. Tiz mentioned the implosion of some of the other sort of more prominent mutual aid funds in the South, and I know the one that I think of immediately is Queer Appalachia, which raised money, and then, it's a long, nasty story, and I don't want to go into it, but one of the questions watching that unfold, one of the questions I have while watching that unfold is like, well, what does this say about the potential pitfalls of mutual aid projects? And I think you're already speaking to that, right? The structural difficulties that folks encounter, and also the difficulties around accountability and responsibility. I'm wondering if you have any more.
But I think that that's why what we're doing, we intentionally stayed small. We intentionally stayed with people that we knew, through people that we knew, that we were already in community with. All of our recipients, are folks that we have connections to. And creating that space where, this is us taking care of each other has really helped to kind of alleviate that that feeling of, is someone taking advantage of these funds? Is someone taking advantage of our donors? And frankly, I also think there's a level of our baby queer Gen Z activists that we know at Davidson College, like to say being coppish, but, I'm not going to look at someone and say, what exactly do you need this money for? If you're Black and trans and unsheltered, you need money for everything. I mean, I believe that you need this money for survival. So there's a lot of that too, like trusting each other. So yeah, I think that, there's ways, but I think that the biggest way, as Sharon pointed out before, to stop those kinds of things from happening is really truly being in community with each other.
I agree, Tiz. I agree. I think we intentionally stayed small, and I've trusted, and we've built trust, and it wasn't like, Tiz, it's not like Tiz and I didn't have talks for like 2 hours sometimes. We would go back and forth, and I'd be like, well, I don't really want to do that. And Tiz would be like, well, here's a good idea. And I'm like, well, here's another idea. And we go back and forth, and somehow we met in the middle. Having the funds centralized is really important. And I feel like, I've got something to lose as well, and so it's important to me that the fund is liquid, that I think every time I distribute, I take a moment of silence, and I thank all the people, every cent. We've got folks, there's somebody who sent us $1. When I got that, like last November, I'm tearing up already. Like, I was just like, and in the note that they left was so beautiful. Like, this is literally all I can afford right now, but thank you, and it was from abroad, and of course, PayPal charged the hell out of it. It was like, by the time it got to us, it was like, 48.5 cents, or something like that. But that's what's happening in the fund. So here I am doing this work, doing my academic work, teaching, trying to deal with chairing a department in pandemic. And then I open up the PayPal account and I get that. And, I'm like, I don't care what's happening to my day. I feel pretty freaking good at that moment. And so I feel like the fund does give back in so many ways. And I feel like, taken Tiz's leadership in terms of how to build community as a community organizer. And it's really helped me to see that there's no other, the way we're doing it, builds community, builds trust, and also hope.
Yeah.
So where are you at now in terms of your plans for growing the fund? Or maybe growing is not the right word, but what are you doing right now? What do you hope to do? Yeah.
Partnerships that we've grown in the time, I reached out to my friends, one of whom works for, pharma, and Pharma gave us $1,500. We got from the Third Wave Fund $10,000, and on the first summer that we were active, TIS applied for that grant. And I remember I looked down, and I was literally in class or trying to do something important, and I looked down at my phone when I saw it come through, and I was just like, yes, and so people were like, "Is Sharon okay there?" And I'm like, I'm good, right? We have partnered with Equality NC, who raised funds for us, have raised funds now for us on 3 occasions. And especially when we decided to avoid burnout, because by December 15th, Tiz and I, we were on like weekly at first distributions.
Bi-weekly. $8,000 every 2 weeks, basically.
It was
just
killing
for
us.
months.
And I was trying to do work, trying to figure out how we could file for the 501c3. And so the next step that we made when we decided to take a break in December, Equality NC under the leadership of Kendra Johnson stepped up, which was amazing.
Thank you, Kendra.
Thank you. And now we've grown in 2 ways. The first way is we have secured a not-for-profit called QTIPOC Forever Home for when we decide, maybe when I retire or whatever, and decide to actually be the ED of trying to get some land, or even before that, if I can get a grant from the state, see if we can get a plot of land, put some horses and folks and activists and housing and a communal kitchen and space. We have this dream. I have the buildings already built in my head, right? And the other thing that we're doing is we're partnering with Equality NC and working on replicating this mutual aid plan at college campuses, in a college community relationship where folks would actually, because there's a QTIPOC mutual aid on UNC's campus in Chapel Hill, and now there's one in the community. So we already have that, and I'm working with activists. I'd like to say too that the students at UNC Chapel Hill have spoken. All 3 of our student leadership folks are Black queer folks, which is amazing. So the student body president and the co-chairs of the Campus Y. And so we've been in discussions with one another to see if we can start this here, App State, and maybe one other institution in the state. So what would happen is students would use student government monies and organizing, et cetera, to do QTIPOC on campus. And then those people would cycle into community to work on QTIPOC mutual aid in their communities, and they would partner with organizers. And those organizers would be paid by the university. Because what happens is we usually tell people, we're going to send you somebody and we're going to pay them $1,500 as an internship. But then it's great, but the activist organizations and community organizations don't get paid for their labor. So I would like to have folks work in those communities and also have the organizers be paid for the organizational work and skill set that they're giving to this next generation. And I want this to be regularized. I want folks to come to campus and go, where's the mutual aid group? That's what I want to do. So that gives you a sense of things we're doing.
Absolutely. And there's actually a question, and this may be the question that you were responding to earlier, from Luisa Turbino Torres in the chat. And just quickly to summarize, I hear them asking, right, how to frame these things to an institution that might be recalcitrant to engage in this kind of work. And I don't know if you have any tips or thoughts on that, but it would be really useful, especially because you're senior, and have so much institutional experience.
I would tell Lisa, to get in touch with me at Sharon at UNC at email.unc.edu. I can put it up in the chat, because I have a proposal for how to do this work that I've shared with Equality NC, and we're kind of vetting right now. It makes sense because university, for instance, I think the student government at UNC has $1.5 million in state funds. That's a lot of money. I feel the way to sell it to them is that students, think about it. I would like there to be a program called Mutual Aid America, except for that program happens while you're in college as opposed to something you do after college, although it could be something you do after college. it trains up students to work with financial, to think outside the box in terms of financial instruments, right? It grows another group of young folk and a new generation of folks who are going to participate in the world very differently, do what the world needs, right? It allows for student government. It creates automatic relationship between student governments, community members, community organizers, which in a sense can, what's the word for it? Foster the kind of what I would call the hollow university plan, where we're building our community together. You know, all of these wonderful kind of like strategic plan words you always hear as faculty and you want to roll your eyes. I'd say take 6 of those strategic plan points and then just put them into the mutual aid. And they'll be like, well, they'll have to then tell you, how we're not really interested in doing that. But I thought you said you wanted to build our community together. Right. So I feel like sometimes taking their rhetoric and then lacing that rhetoric, you know, kind of, you know, we launder their rhetoric through the nomenclature and the vocabularies of mutual aid to show them how they can do it. So an activist once said to me when I was very young doing work in Akwesasne, and she said, Sharon, if you want people to do something, you actually have to show them how to do it. So don't just make demands, come with a plan. And that
is a huge tenet.
Yep. And come with a plan that's
organizing.
This is your plan. And here's how mine maps onto it. We want to do these 10 things. Oh, you only want to do 2? Great. Let's start with those 2. And they're, you know, after the meeting, they're like, I don't really know how that happened, but now we're doing it.
Yeah, I think Sharon made a really important point about meeting people where they are. A lot of times pushback really just comes from people can't see a path forward because they don't have a framework for it. And it's a huge, you know, organizers like Ella Baker were very, very clear that you meet people where you are, where they are, and that's how you build power. Another thing that I wanted to bring up with all of this is a way that we have decided to work towards us being able to make this work more sustainable. The biweekly fundraisers were exhausting, and not only just exhausting to organizers, it was exhausting to our small, loyal pool of donors who were giving constantly. A lot of the people who were contributing to us were people who really could only afford to give $10 or $15. So they're also poor queer people. And then it was also exhausting to our recipients because they just never knew how they were going to budget to survive. They didn't know if they were going to receive $10 or $200, and waiting through those biweekly campaigns, it was a huge source of stress for them. So one of the things that we've decided to do is create a very low tech solidarity pledge. We try to figure out Fundly and, you know, people doing like monthly subscriptions through PayPal, and the fees are really high, and it took a while to get the money out to people, which would be hard for us if we needed to offer emergency funds to people in between distribution days. So we're literally just having people sign up a solidarity pledge with how much they want to offer. And then sending them an email once a month with updates on what we're doing. And this is like, and a direct link to the PayPal. And that is, I think, going to help make this work sustainable long-term. It's cheap, free, easy, whatever, low-tech anti-burnout solution to burnout. So yeah. Another thing that I guess like, sorry, I'm looking at Atlanta Mutual Aid. Awesome. Anyways, I got distracted, but I can send that solidarity pledge if people want to look at it. And thank you.
There's a question from Sophia Fleming, and also one from, and then, yeah.
Yeah, let's go to them.
Let me see. What type of transformative changes have you seen in individuals in the academy when they become involved in this type of work with mutual aid? Yes. I mean, basically you answered the question there, that I feel, I think one of the things that it's done is it's actually enhanced my community of QTIPOC and queer folks on my campus. I can't tell you how many times as the fund became known, right, in the Triangle, and, people started to contribute and the campaigns went on, I would get an email from a colleague who I didn't even know was there. Like, I saw this thing for your fund. Thank you. So it's grown that community. And I feel like it's tapped into me, a place in myself that I didn't know is that strong. In terms of that I could do, this is the thing, I've been an academic for a long time. I'm fine with, giving papers, whatever. I was worried about, because I'm like, I don't know if I want to become involved where people are going to rely on me, so I've had to become a reliable person in a way that I haven't been consistently. Not that, I'm not a good friend or anything like that. At least I think of myself as a good friend. What I mean is, like, how does one love and care for strangers? Especially in a pandemic. Like, we would have already gotten together with the fund with everybody by now. Many of the folks I haven't seen, some of the folks I've known for years, through community. And so it's brought that connection. And it's also outed a lot of people on campus to me, like, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, yes, brother, yes, sister, yes, person that I can now look at and who knows me. And I feel like it's helped, it's helped folks on campus feel like there is a place for us because we have a broader community that cares. And it's helped me feel that way. I don't feel so isolated on campus anymore. I feel like I have this entire village behind me, that's protecting me, but I'm protecting them. It's mutual aid is mutually satisfactory when it works well. That's why it's mutual. It's like you give, but you get.
Yeah.
A couple of real nuts and bolts questions about funds and about disbursement here. One from Caitlin Campbell and then one from Stacey Cutler. So I guess maybe we can start with Caitlin's.
Yeah. Hey, Caitlin, how are you? Yes, we tend to empty the account down to like what we call emergency funds. I usually try to leave between $200 and $500 in the bank or the PayPal in order to do emergency funds. Our big thing is like 100% of our money goes to recipients, that PayPal or doesn't take out. So PayPal is the only, I have a business account with PayPal. I don't necessarily, but I signed up as a business, not for profit, but without the not for profit kind of end. Because if I do that, then I have to do quarterly reports and all this other stuff that I don't want to do. So basically what we do is, it's been hard because I'll keep that money in there. And sometimes we'll have emergencies come up in the middle of the month and I'll be giving out those distributions. It is hard though, sometimes when we get a check and it's in the bank, because there's no way to take the money from the bank to PayPal. PayPal can send money to your bank, but doing it in the reverse, I haven't figured out how to do that. And it just helps to have somebody involved who, is just a little bit liquid. And so sometimes I take money from my own account and I just pay the account. And then, I go get a check, I go get money out of the ATM to pay myself back, or I could just consider it, this is my contribution for the month. So, and I say this, like, do not take this on if you are financially precarious, because the outlay can be, one time I found myself like getting flagged on every website when I was trying to remember that horrible Western Union? Oh my God. Tiz was basically like, you are not getting in a car with $2,000 cash and driving to Virginia, Sharon. And I'm like, but why not? I remember that was my favorite moment, right? And then I got blocked off of like, it was like the university something. I got blocked off of like, no credit card would work on Western Union. Then I got shut down on Cash App. So the university shut me down, which was good. I probably shouldn't have been driving around with $2,000 cash to give money to someone I don't know. But basically I would say that the banking side of it can be a little arduous, but if you have some wiggle room of $500, it's doable. But I would like more senior folks, senior queer folks out there to do this work. It's actually gratifying. And it doesn't, when Cash App shuts you down, you do get your feelings hurt for about 24 hours. But I hope that answers your question. Yes. The thing about mutual aid, the reason why we don't build up the funds is because I learned through doing some research that what mutual aid means is that whatever's in there goes. And we usually have only that emergency reserve. And Tiz and I had back and forth about this in the beginning. I'm like, I want to leave this much, and Tiz is like, people could use the money now. And I'm like, good point. And then something crazy would happen. Like, one day we were like, I don't know how we're going to get this money, blah, blah, blah. And we looked in there, one person gave $2,000 and another person gave $1,000. And all of a sudden we had $3,000. So I'm not going to what's the word I should use, Tiz? I'm not going to value spirit. Just spirit.
Yeah, I mean, there have been moments where I've just been so burnt out. We have, we're at 25% of where we need to be to get everyone at the bare minimum of like $200. And it just shows up because, I mean, I'm not a spiritual person, but there's something there. Some hands are holding this work. And
one time we were talking, sure. I mean, Tiz, remember that time we were talking and you're like, have you looked at the PayPal? And I said, I looked at it this morning. And you could tell from my voice that it's not good. And there was a low point. I think one point, one of our distributions was $35. I'm not, and that the ups and downs of mutual aid, that's hard on you. But I was saying, I said, I don't want to look at it. And they were like, well, you have to look at it. You have to look at it right now because we have to do a distribution tomorrow. And I'm like, okay, all right, fine. Literally, while we were talking, somebody sent us $1,000. And I was like, you won't believe this. I told you we had $45 in there earlier today, and now we have $1,045. And we were like, dun, 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 the whole running around the kitchen, the pandemic screaming through the video. So we've had amazing highs and amazing lows. Like, it's an embarrassment to me to even give folks this money, but that's all we got right now.
No, and actually what was really sweet is that when we've had distributions that are that small, we've had people say, I absolutely don't need this $35, so that our people that $35 is going to be the difference between them eating today can have it. And that's when the community, our recipients have stepped forward to support each other. I wanted to respond to Sig Giordano, awesome last name, by the way. So we actually do our honorariums, if that's how you say it, are going back to the fund. And the way that I've dealt with that, for me being the poor person that can't take on extra income, is that money has gone to Sharon. As Sharon is not the person that has to worry about being denied services because of that kind of income. So I don't know if that helps your question. But that's where having someone who isn't going to deal with undue tax burdens or get denied services and isn't in a place of financial stability, do that work. That's where that comes in.
So Stacy has another question. So there's the first one about Georgia guidelines that say you cannot use state and foundation funds for donations. And then this follow-up question, SEWSA and other academic orgs can perhaps help because we offer sponsorship/marketing to universities, but we're nonprofit, which is maybe a question for the SEWSA.
Right. I can help you with sorry, Hill. Sorry.
Go for it.
I was going to say, I can help you with a workaround for universities. This is the reason why we're building in this program for paying community organizers, right? because, you know, universities, public or private, pay members of the community for all manner of things all the time. And that is not a difficult ask, you know, on a proposal. You know, we have, you know, everybody has as part of their strategic plan community partnerships. So how do we do this work? Well, one of the things that I've done as chair is I've just come on board with my director of undergraduate studies and director of graduate studies to do community-facing work for our graduate students. So our graduate students are going to get research funds this summer, and then later next year in the spring, they're going to do community-facing presentations of that work. And part of this community partnership will obviously be at some point a connection to community members who will show up, see the work, and realize that those nutty, you know, I want them to do presentations at the state fair. Why? Because someone will say, hey, those nutty academics from American Studies are doing that presentation again. They're only like a minute, you know, 5 minutes. Go look at it, because they're doing some really kind of funky work, right? So I'm really involved in community partnerships. When you become chair, the first thing they start telling you is like, you need to make sure you make our partnership strong or stronger. And so that community partnership is there. That language is there in the institution, and we can, for lack of a better word, exploit that language. You know, like ask your department, who are our community partners? What have we been doing with those community partners? And could we community partner in this way? And the university is always looking for a way to make undergraduates like CVs heavier. And can you imagine saying that you worked with like alternative financial instruments as a mutual aid person for 4 years while you're at college, doing it both raising money for folks on campus, also raising money for folks in the community, you know, along with folks who were being paid in community. So in a sense, your status is not necessarily is equalized, you know, as opposed to here I am doing this community work with someone who's already giving their time to this. You know, the university needs to pay more, not less. So I hope that helps in terms of how to maybe get around. Ask them about their community partnership health.
That's super useful. I actually had a question that's it's about state and institutional failures that the fund is addressing. And obviously some of these are very clear to us. But then I was wondering specifically what's happening in North Carolina, right, in the Piedmont and in the Triangle. That pre-existed the pandemic, but it was probably intensified by the pandemic.
Yeah.
It's been hard in North Carolina. I mean, you know, Amendment 1, HB 2, Trump. It's been really difficult. And I feel that all of that work that many of us were doing wherever we were in the state created the community networks that are really strong across the state. And that, you know, tapping into those networks hasn't been as difficult as it has been in other places. I think the fact that I belong to a community co-op, you know, has helped. You know, there are a lot of QTIPOC folks in the co-op, a lot of queer folks in the co-op. And so it feels like home space for me to go to. That might not be the same. In the co-op that I'm talking about reminds me of the co-op that I belonged to in the 80s when all the organic vegetables, you'd have to ask someone, what is it? Because you weren't really sure, because organic, you know, like there was like, you know, some small farmer with like a batch of potatoes. You're like, is that a potato? You know, because it was kind of, you know, weird. And so I feel like a lot was going on in North Carolina. What I'm saying is that we're building on activism that was happening. You know, I helped I helped a lot of people. I organized community events to defeat Amendment 1. That didn't work. HB 2 got struck down, but some of its provisions are still in the books, you know, which are entirely insulting to members of our community. But because everyone was doing that work, when COVID happened, it was much easier for, you know, I already knew TIS. And I know that Queer Family Dinner wouldn't have been happening in Carborough. And this is the first conversation we had, TIS, is where I was like, why is all the queer stuff happening in other parts in the Triangle, but nothing really happening here? Mm-hmm. You know? And I was like, we should do something. And then Queer Family Dinner, TIS started Queer Family Dinner. And so all of those things were fed in to, you know, I don't want to say that, you know, we were some kind of magic. You know, we were just building off of all of this organizing and activist work.
Yeah, I think 2016 was, you know, a year that threw a lot of us into, I mean, I know multiple people who had the resources to do so, trans folks that moved to frickin' Canada because they were I mean, there was just so much fear about what was going to happen to queer community. And, you know, also recognizing that my experience as a white trans person, like, it was the first time in my adult life that I was actually fearing, you know, institutional discrimination because of my identity. It was not something that our Black trans folks, Black and brown queer community members had experienced. Yeah, you know, in North Carolina, there's no protections. I sent a link, ncisready.org. The Campaign for Southern Equality and Equality NC are working very hard to get state and local protections passed. I live in Chapel Hill, work in Carborough. Carborough has a cis lesbian mayor, a white mayor, this community, I remember the first time I moved here when I was 21 years old, it was the first time in my life that I had been in a town where no one cared if you were queer. And I think what happens, and when Sharon was like, where is all the queer stuff happening? Why is all the queer stuff happening in Durham? Why is all the queer stuff happening, you know, in Raleigh? And it was like, well, people, when you say there isn't an LGBTQ center in Orange County, people don't believe that. They just assume because, you know, there's rainbow flags everywhere that, you know, that it is a safe place where there are resources for queer folks. And, you know, we're fighting the same things that other parts of the state are fighting, namely gentrification. Queer people can't afford to live in this community. It's a heavily policed community. If you're a queer of color, do you feel safe here? You know, these organizations are fighting very hard to get these local protections passed so that, you know, queers who are being discriminated against have a case in court. But the thing is that, you know, specifically the recipients that we have that face trans misogynoir, it's just so heartbreaking to see how difficult it is for our Black trans femmes and thems to survive. It is just, I mean, and at every turn, our community members are discriminated against in the vilest of ways. They can't get jobs, they can't get houses, they can't get health care. You know, these are just, and the community is letting our people down by allowing this to happen. If you look at the racial wealth gap within the LGBTQIA+ community, you know, if the people with class and race privilege and wealth privilege in our queer community, if they decided that we're not okay with seeing another Black trans woman on the streets, we're not okay with seeing another Black trans woman in a trafficking situation or murdered, you know, we could stop that from happening. And that's some of the links that I posted earlier. You know, you're seeing people like Kayla Gore with My Sister's House and Cheyenne Dorshow with Glitz, who are Black trans women who are literally taking these societal ills in their own hands and creating safe spaces for their Black trans sisters and brothers. And so, yeah, these societal ills are because this is not a state where any kind of anti-discrimination is upheld. It's a right to work state. You know, we have people like the governor's board that are just a bunch of old windbag bigots. We know this. We specifically started doing this work because we recognized that this pandemic was going to hit our people who were already struggling to survive systemic racism and trans misogynoir and queerphobia. We knew that this pandemic was going to hit them hardest, and we decided to create our own safety net for our people.
I want to just be mindful of the time. We're ending at 1:15. So this would probably be a great moment if folks who have questions or comments or, words of support, whatever you want to drop into the chat, take a moment. And while folks are gathering their thoughts, I want to note that all of the info about how to support this fund is under, if you click on the Expo tab, there's a whole specific set of slides under the Expo tab about this that will get you in touch with the fund, show you where you can donate, learn more about the fund, read some reporting on it. And I want to also call attention to the fact that tonight at 5, there's a panel on my new book. This is not maybe the space to go on about that, but there's a panel on my new book called Transcare with Andrea Pitts, who's at UNC Charlotte, and Jack Giesking, who's at University of Kentucky, to the book and talking through the book with me. So that's happening at 5. And then at 6:30, there's a virtual dance party if folks are interested. And then tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, a wrap-up hour to talk about, where we're going with the organization, what kind of work y'all want to see us do in the future, what kind of work you want to be involved in, SEWSA. So that's that. But I just want to see, anything in the comments. A lot of support.
We're so pumped to be here and honored. And thank you, Hill, and everyone who is here to watch.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. This is, I just want to tell anyone out there just who's thinking about it and has trepidation, just find someone in the community to partner with and do it. You won't regret it. It's the intergenerational work that we're best at as BIPOC and QTIPOC people. We believe that our elders are with us, not only in our hearts, but in our communities. And so I feel like that ethic is something that's carrying forward, and it's a very queer ethic.
All right. Well, to wrap up a little bit early, thank you so much, Sharon and Tiz. It was awesome. It was wonderful to talk to you.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah,
Yes.
You're very welcome. And everybody that's here, spread the word about the fund, give whatever support you can to it, and start thinking about how to replicate it at your own institutions if you happen to be within an academic institution currently.
And I'm willing to talk to anyone at any time about how to do this work. Just contact me. I'm at UNC Chapel Hill in American Studies. Just Google me and, say you saw me on the SEWSA event, and we'll go from there.
Awesome. All right. Well,
thank you, everybody. Love you, Sharon.
Love you, Tiz. Thank you, girl.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.